You ruin everything. Those were the words that echoed in my mind long before that Sunday was over, but when I woke up that morning, I had no idea my life was about to change. My name is Margaret Collins, I'm 72 years old, and for as long as I can remember, Sunday mornings had always brought me peace. Every week, I put on my favorite blue church dress, pinned a small silver brooch to my collar, and drove the same 7 miles to the little white church that had been part of our family's life for generations. The morning air was cool, and sunlight stretched across the quiet streets as I parked my sedan and walked toward the entrance. I remember smiling when I saw familiar faces greeting each other on the front steps. It felt like every other Sunday. At least, that's what I thought. The sanctuary was already filling up when I stepped inside. Soft music floated through the room, and families settled into their usual places. For years, my family had sat near the front. Not because we wanted attention, but because that was where my late husband always liked to sit. Even after he passed away 12 years earlier, I continued sitting there. It made me feel close to him. As I made my way down the center aisle, I noticed my granddaughter Emily standing near the front pew. She was 26 now, beautiful, confident, and admired by nearly everyone who knew her. I loved her more than words could describe. I had held her when she was a newborn. I had attended every school recital, every graduation, every important milestone. There was a time when she used to run into my arms the moment she saw me. But lately, something had changed. The warmth between us had faded, replaced by a distance I couldn't understand. I told myself it was just adulthood. I told myself not to worry. As I approached the pew, I smiled and said, "Good morning, sweetheart." Emily looked at me, but she didn't smile back. Instead, her expression hardened. For a moment, I thought maybe she was having a bad day. Then she stepped slightly into my path. The people around us began settling into their seats. The music continued playing softly. Nobody seemed to notice what was happening except us. Then Emily leaned closer. Her voice was quiet enough that she probably thought only I would hear it. She was wrong. "Grandma," she said coldly, "you need to sit somewhere else." I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" Her eyes narrowed. "You always have to make everything about yourself." I felt my stomach tighten. "Emily, I don't understand." Then came the sentence that seemed to stop time itself. "You ruin everything." A few nearby people turned their heads. The words weren't loud, but they were loud enough. I stood frozen in the aisle.
My heart pounded against my chest.
I searched her face for some sign of regret, some indication that she hadn't meant it. Instead, she pointed toward the back of the sanctuary. "There are empty seats back there." The silence between us felt unbearable. I could feel eyes beginning to drift in our direction. A younger version of me might have argued. A younger version of me might have demanded an explanation. But at 72, I had learned that dignity often means staying calm when your heart is breaking. So I nodded once. "All right," I whispered. Then I turned and walked toward the last pew. Every step felt heavier than the one before. As I sat down, I stared at the front of the church and tried to focus on the service, but my thoughts kept returning to Emily's face. There was anger there. Not momentary frustration. Not irritation. Something deeper. Something that had been growing for a long time. And for the first time, I realized there was a reason my granddaughter looked at me like a stranger. I just didn't know what it was yet. The rest of the service passed in a blur. I heard the pastor speaking, heard the congregation singing, heard pages turning as people followed along in their Bibles, but none of it truly reached me. My mind remained fixed on Emily and the look in her eyes. It was not irritation. It was not disappointment. It was resentment. Deep, settled resentment. Every few minutes, I found myself glancing toward the front pew, where she sat beside her mother, my daughter Karen. Neither of them looked back at me. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. When the service finally ended, people began filing into the fellowship hall for coffee and conversation. Normally, I enjoyed those moments. Small-town churches have a way of making everyone feel connected. But that morning I considered slipping out quietly and driving home. Before I could leave, however, several church members approached me. "Margaret, are you doing all right?" one woman asked gently. I forced a smile. Of course. Just a little tired today. She nodded, but I could tell she did not believe me. Word travels quickly in places like ours, and I knew more than a few people had witnessed what happened. I excused myself and headed toward the parking lot. As I stepped outside, I spotted Emily standing near her car. For a moment, I considered walking over and asking her directly what had caused all this anger. Part of me wanted answers immediately. Another part feared what I might hear. Before I could decide, she got into her vehicle and drove away without even looking in my direction. I stood there watching until her car disappeared around the corner. The drive home felt longer than usual. My house sat on 3 quiet acres outside town, surrounded by mature oak trees that my late husband had planted decades ago. Normally, the sight of them brought me comfort. That day they only reminded me of how much had changed since he was gone. Robert had always been the one who held the family together. He knew how to smooth over disagreements before they became wounds. I often wondered what he would say if he were sitting beside me now. Probably something wise and simple. Something like, there is always more to the story than what people tell you. After parking in the driveway, I went inside and placed my purse on the kitchen counter. The house felt unusually quiet. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window overlooking the backyard. My thoughts drifted backward through the years. Emily had been 6 years old when she first spent an entire summer at my house. We baked cookies together. We planted tomatoes in the garden. We stayed up late watching old movies. She used to tell everyone I was her favorite person in the world. So what had happened? What had changed so dramatically that she now looked at me with open hostility? Around 2 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see a friend from church checking on me. Instead, the number was unfamiliar. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Something told me not to. I answered. Hello. There was silence on the other end. Then a nervous voice spoke. Margaret.
Yes.
Who is this? Another pause followed. The caller sounded hesitant, almost frightened. You do not know me very well, the voice said. But I know why Emily hates you. My grip tightened around the phone. Every muscle in my body went still. What are you talking about? I asked quietly. The person exhaled shakily. Because somebody has been lying to her for years. For several seconds, I could not speak. I simply sat there staring out the kitchen window while the stranger's words echoed through my mind. Somebody has been lying to her for years. I swallowed hard and tightened my grip on the phone. Who is this? I asked. The caller hesitated. My name is Lisa Monroe. I used to work with your daughter, Karen. The name sounded familiar, though I could not immediately place it. What does this have to do with Emily? Another pause followed. I could hear nervous breathing on the other end of the line. More than you realize, Lisa said quietly. I have wanted to call you for a long time, but I did not know if it was my place. My heart was pounding now. Please tell me what you mean. Not over the phone, she replied. There is too much to explain. A chill ran through me. I glanced toward the family photographs displayed across my kitchen shelf. Pictures of birthdays, graduations, holidays, and smiling faces seemed to stare back at me. For years I had believed my family shared the same memories. Now I was beginning to wonder whether some of those memories had been rewritten. Then tell me where we can meet, I said. Lisa sounded relieved. There is a diner on Maple Street. Tomorrow morning at 10. Before I could ask another question, she added something that made my stomach twist. Margaret, whatever happens, do not confront Emily yet. Why? I asked. Because she truly believes what she has been told. The line went silent for a moment. Then Lisa said, and if you confront the wrong person too soon, the truth may disappear before you ever find it. A second later, the call ended. I remained frozen in my chair, staring at my phone. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller than before. I replayed every word of the conversation again and again. Somebody had been lying to Emily. But who?
And why?
I thought about Karen, my daughter. We had not been as close these past few years as we once were. Nothing dramatic had happened. Life had simply pulled us in different directions. She was busy with work. Emily was building her career. Family gatherings became less frequent. Still, I never imagined there was a hidden conflict beneath the surface. As the afternoon faded into evening, I found myself searching through old memories. Tiny details I had ignored for years suddenly seemed important. I remembered occasions when Emily became strangely distant after spending time alone with certain relatives. I remember questions she had asked that seemed oddly specific. At the time I assumed it was curiosity. Now I was not so sure. Around sunset, I walked into the living room and sat beside an old wooden cabinet that had belonged to Robert. Inside were family albums dating back decades. I opened one and slowly turned the pages. There was Emily at age 5, smiling with frosting on her face after baking cupcakes. There she was at 12, proudly holding a science fair ribbon. There she was at 18, standing beside me on graduation day. In every photograph, she looked happy. In every photograph, we looked like a family. Yet somewhere along the way, that connection had fractured. The question was not when. The question was why. As darkness settled outside, I closed the album and returned it to the cabinet. That was when I noticed something unusual. Tucked behind a stack of old papers was a small envelope I had not seen in years. There was no stamp on it, no address, just 3 handwritten words on the front. For Margaret only. My pulse quickened. I knew that handwriting immediately. It belonged to someone who had once been very close to our family. Someone connected to events from more than 2 decades earlier. Slowly, I opened the envelope, unaware that what waited inside would change everything I thought I knew. My hands trembled as I carefully unfolded the letter. The paper had yellowed with age, and the ink had faded slightly, but I immediately recognized the signature at the bottom before I even began reading. It was from Diane Whitaker. 22 years earlier, Diane had been one of my closest friends. She had known every detail of our family, every celebration, every hardship, every secret. Then, almost overnight, she moved away and gradually disappeared from our lives. We exchanged a few Christmas cards over the years, but eventually even those stopped. I had not thought about Diane in a very long time. Yet somehow, her letter had been hidden in my home all these years. Slowly, I began reading. The first few lines seemed ordinary enough. She thanked me for my friendship and spoke warmly about memories we had shared. Then the tone changed. My heartbeat quickened as I reached the middle of the page. Diane wrote that she had become aware of a serious misunderstanding within my family. She did not explain everything directly, but she warned that one day someone might try to rewrite the truth about events that happened when Emily was still a child. I frowned and read the paragraph again. The wording was careful, almost cautious. It felt as though Diane had wanted to say more but feared putting everything on paper. Then I reached a sentence that made me sit upright. If Karen ever begins blaming you for what happened, remember that some people find comfort in changing the past instead of facing it. I stared at those words.
Karen.
My daughter. Why would Diane specifically mention her? I read the sentence 3 more times, hoping I had misunderstood it. But the meaning remained the same. Diane had apparently been worried about something long before any of the current problems began. A knot formed in my stomach. For years I had assumed the growing distance between me and Emily was simply part of life. Children grow up. Families become busy. Relationships change. But what if that was not the real explanation? What if someone had deliberately influenced the way Emily saw me? The possibility seemed unbelievable. Yet the phone call from Lisa and the contents of Diane's letter pointed in the same direction. Neither woman had directly accused anyone. Still, both seemed convinced that a false story existed. I set the letter down and walked to the kitchen. Outside, the evening sky had turned dark blue. The house felt unusually silent. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to think logically. If Karen had been upset with me about something, why would she never discuss it openly? We had disagreed over small things throughout the years, like any mother and daughter. Nothing serious enough to explain Emily's hostility. Unless there was something I did not know. Unless there was an event I remembered differently from everyone else. That thought unsettled me more than anything. I returned to the living room and examined the envelope again. This time I noticed a small folded note tucked inside that I had overlooked. It was only a few lines long. Unlike the letter, the note appeared to have been written quickly. One sentence immediately caught my attention. "If you ever need proof, look inside the cedar box." I froze. The cedar box. I knew exactly what Diane meant. Years ago, Robert and I stored important family keepsakes in a cedar chest located in the attic. After his death, I rarely opened it. In fact, I could not remember the last time I had even thought about it. Suddenly, the conversation with Lisa, Diane's warning, and Emily's behavior all seemed connected by an invisible thread. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the attic stairs. Somewhere above me, hidden beneath decades of dust and forgotten memories, might be the first real clue to understanding why my granddaughter had turned against me. The attic smelled of old wood, dust, and memories. As I climbed the narrow staircase, my flashlight cast long shadows across boxes that had not been touched in years. Robert had always been the one who organized everything up here. After he passed away, I rarely had the heart to sort through our stored belongings. Now, for the first time in more than a decade, I found myself searching through pieces of the past for answers. The cedar chest sat exactly where I remembered it, tucked beneath a small window near the back wall. A thin layer of dust covered the lid. I knelt beside it and ran my fingers across the wood. Instantly, memories flooded back. This chest had traveled with us through 3 different homes. Inside were family keepsakes, letters, photographs, and documents too important to throw away. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the lid. The familiar scent of cedar drifted into the air. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. There were photo albums, old holiday cards, and several folders neatly stacked inside. I carefully began sorting through them one by one. Nearly 20 minutes passed before I found anything that caught my attention. At the very bottom of the chest sat a large manila envelope. Across the front, written in Robert's handwriting, were 4 simple words. "Do not discard." My pulse quickened. Robert had always been deliberate with labels. If he marked something that way, there was a reason. I opened the envelope and discovered a collection of documents along with several photographs. Most appeared ordinary at first. Family gatherings, school events, birthday parties. Then I noticed a folded piece of paper clipped to the back.
It was a handwritten timeline.
The date at the top immediately stood out. 22 years earlier. The same period Diane had referenced in her letter. My heart began racing. I unfolded the page completely and started reading. The notes appeared to have been written by Robert himself. They described a series of events involving Karen during a particularly difficult period in her life. Several entries mentioned disagreements, misunderstandings, and emotional strain within the family. Nothing shocking, nothing dramatic, but one sentence made me stop cold. Karen believed something happened that never occurred. I stared at the words. Robert had underlined them twice. Beneath the sentence, he had written another note. "Someday Emily may hear a version of this story. If she does, she deserves the truth." I felt a chill spread through my entire body. Suddenly, the room seemed smaller. For years, I had assumed whatever distance existed between Emily and me developed naturally over time. Now evidence suggested otherwise. Robert had apparently worried about this exact situation decades ago. Why had he never discussed it with me? Or had he tried, only for me to dismiss his concerns? I searched the envelope more carefully and discovered a second handwritten note tucked between 2 photographs. This one was much shorter. "If questions ever arise, speak to Diane. She knows what happened." I closed my eyes for a moment. Diane again. Her name kept appearing at every turn. The woman who had warned me through her letter. The woman who seemed connected to the truth everyone else was avoiding. By now it was nearly midnight. Common sense told me to get some sleep before meeting Lisa the next morning. But sleep felt impossible. Every answer seemed to create 2 new questions. I carefully returned the documents to the envelope and carried everything downstairs. As I entered the kitchen, I glanced at the clock. 11:47. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated on the counter. A text message appeared from a number I did not recognize. There were only 9 words in the message, but they instantly made my blood run cold. Stop looking into the past before someone gets hurt. I stared at the message for a long time. The words themselves were not threatening. There was no direct accusation, no demand, no explanation. Yet something about them unsettled me deeply. Stop looking into the past before someone gets hurt. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Only a few hours earlier, I had received a mysterious phone call. Then I found Diane's letter. Then Robert's notes. Now, an unknown person somehow knew I was searching for answers. I checked the number, but it was unfamiliar. I considered replying, then decided against it. Whoever sent the message wanted a reaction. I was not going to give them one. Instead, I saved a screenshot and placed my phone face down on the counter. Sleep came slowly that night. Every time I closed my eyes, pieces of the puzzle replayed in my mind. Emily's cold expression at church, Lisa's warning, Diane's letter, Robert's handwritten notes. By morning, I felt exhausted but determined. At 9:30, I left the house and drove toward Maple Street. The diner sat near the edge of town, the kind of place where locals gathered for coffee and conversation. When I arrived, Lisa was already there waiting in a corner booth. She looked to be in her late 50s. The moment she saw me, she stood and offered a nervous smile. "Margaret, thank you for coming." I sat across from her. "You said you know why Emily hates me." Lisa nodded slowly. "I know part of it. A waitress brought coffee, but neither of us touched it." "Then please explain," I said. Lisa took a deep breath. 22 years ago, Karen went through a difficult period. You remember that?" I nodded. Karen had been struggling emotionally after several major life changes. It had been a stressful time for the entire family. "There were misunderstandings," Lisa continued. "At first, I thought they would eventually be resolved. Instead, they grew." "What misunderstandings?" I asked. Lisa glanced around the diner before lowering her voice. Karen became convinced that certain decisions made during that time changed the course of her life. "What decisions?" "Decisions she believes you made for her." I frowned. "That makes no sense." "I know," Lisa replied, "because the version she remembers is not the version that actually happened." My heart skipped a beat. Then why does she believe it? Lisa looked genuinely sad. "Because when people repeat a story often enough, especially during painful moments, they sometimes begin to believe it themselves." I sat back in my chair. Suddenly, Robert's notes made more sense. Karen believes something happened that never occurred. Did Karen tell Emily these stories? I asked quietly. Lisa hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "Not all at once," she admitted. "Over many years. Small comments. Little stories. Tiny details added here and there." I felt as though the air had been knocked out of my lungs. Emily had not suddenly decided to resent me. Her opinion had been shaped gradually. Piece by piece. Year after year. "Why would Karen do that?" I whispered. "I do not think she set out to hurt you," Lisa said. "I think she convinced herself she was telling the truth." The answer should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel worse. Because if Lisa was right, then my daughter was not deliberately lying. She genuinely believed a false version of the past. That kind of misunderstanding could become almost impossible to correct. Before I could ask another question, Lisa reached into her purse and pulled out a worn folder. She slid it across the table toward me. "I have kept these for 22 years, she said. "I always hoped they would never be needed." My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were documents, handwritten notes, and several photographs. Then I saw a familiar signature near the top of the first page. Karen's. And beneath it was a statement that directly contradicted everything she apparently claimed happened years later. My eyes remained fixed on Karen's signature for several seconds. I knew that signature better than anyone. I had seen it on birthday cards, school forms, and countless family documents over the years. There was no possibility of mistake. The document in front of me had been signed by my daughter 22 years earlier. Slowly, I began reading the statement. The date matched the period Lisa had mentioned. The document appeared to be part of a counseling program Karen had voluntarily attended during a particularly stressful chapter of her life. Most of the statement focused on personal goals, family relationships, and plans for the future. Then I reached a paragraph that made my heart stop. In her own handwriting, Karen described a difficult decision she had made entirely on her own. More importantly, she specifically stated that neither I nor Robert had pressured her, influenced her, or made the decision for her. I read the paragraph twice, then a third time. The words were unmistakable. Yet according to Lisa, the story Karen later shared with Emily was completely different. "This cannot be real," I whispered. "It is real," Lisa replied gently. I watched her write it. I looked up. Then why would she later claim something else happened? Lisa sighed. "I wish I knew. At first, I thought it was simply grief and regret. Sometimes people revisit painful periods of their lives and start imagining different outcomes. They ask themselves what might have happened if certain choices had been different." I stared back down at the folder. The evidence seemed undeniable. Yet the idea that Karen had spent years believing a different version of events felt impossible to accept. "Did she ever tell you directly that she blamed me?" I asked. Lisa nodded reluctantly. "Several times." The answer hurt more than I expected. I had spent years wondering why my daughter seemed distant. Meanwhile, she had apparently been carrying resentment I never knew existed. "Why did nobody tell me?" I asked quietly. Lisa looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Because most of us assumed it would eventually pass. We thought she would work through it. Instead, the story became more fixed with each passing year." I leaned back in the booth and rubbed my temples. The entire situation felt surreal. For decades, I had believed our family was built upon shared memories. Now I was discovering that some of those memories were not shared at all. They were competing versions of the past. Lisa carefully slid another document toward me. "There is more." I opened it and immediately recognized another familiar name. Diane Whitaker. Attached to the document was a signed witness statement confirming the same sequence of events Karen had originally described. Diane had documented everything shortly after happened. Dates, conversations, locations, and details all matched Karen's original account. The consistency was remarkable. "This is why Diane was worried," Lisa explained. "She realized years ago that the story was changing." My stomach tightened. Suddenly Diane's letter made perfect sense. She had anticipated this possibility long before any public conflict emerged. "Did Emily ever see any of this?" I asked. Lisa shook her head. "Not that I know of." That answer troubled me deeply. Emily had only been exposed to one version of the story. If everything Lisa showed me was authentic, then my granddaughter had spent most of her life hearing a narrative that painted me as the person responsible for a painful chapter that was never actually my fault. Before I could process that thought, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen and felt my pulse spike instantly. It was a text message from Emily. She rarely contacted me directly anymore. For a moment, I simply stared at her name. Then I opened the message. There was only one sentence. "Grandma, if someone is talking to you about the past, please stop asking questions. Some truths are better left buried." The message from Emily stayed on my screen long after Lisa stopped talking. I read it again and again, searching for some hidden meaning between the words. "Grandma, if someone is talking to you about the past, please stop asking questions. Some truths are better left buried." The wording struck me immediately. Emily was not angry. She was not mocking me. If anything, she sounded worried. That realization unsettled me more than all the documents I had seen that morning. Lisa noticed the expression on my face. "What is it?" she asked. Without speaking, I handed her the phone. She read the message and frowned. "That is not good." "What do you mean?" I asked. "It means someone knows you are getting close to answers." I looked around the diner. For the first time, I became aware of every person in the room. A man reading a newspaper. 2 women drinking coffee near the window. A couple sharing breakfast at the counter. They all appeared ordinary. Yet suddenly I felt exposed. "You think someone is watching me?" I asked quietly. Lisa shook her head. "I do not know. But I know this much. Emily would not have sent that message unless someone had spoken to her recently. That possibility lingered in my mind as we reviewed the rest of the folder. Several documents confirmed the same timeline. Karen's original statements, Diane's notes, counseling records, personal letters. Every piece pointed in the same direction. 22 years earlier, Karen had made an important life decision on her own. At the time, she accepted responsibility for it. Years later, however, her version of events slowly changed. Eventually, she came to believe that I had somehow influenced her choice. The evidence contradicted that belief completely. Yet evidence does not always defeat emotion. Sometimes emotions become stronger than facts. By the time I left the diner, I felt emotionally exhausted. Lisa promised to make copies of everything and deliver them to my house later that week. Before we parted ways, she placed a hand on my arm. "Margaret, be careful who you trust right now." "Do you think Karen knows these records still exist?" I asked. Lisa hesitated. "I honestly do not know." The drive home felt strangely quiet. My mind kept returning to Emily's message. Why would she want me to stop searching? Was she protecting someone? Or was someone protecting her from the truth? As I pulled into my driveway, another thought occurred to me. If Emily believed I was responsible for something terrible, why contact me at all? Why not simply continue avoiding me? Her message suggested conflict,
Doubt.
uncertainty. Perhaps, for the first time, cracks were beginning to appear in the story she had been told. That evening, I spread the documents across my dining room table. For hours, I compared dates, notes, and letters. The more I studied them, the more one detail stood out. There was a gap. Nearly 6 months of missing information. Events before the gap were well documented. Events after the gap were documented too. But those 6 months remained almost completely unexplained. I searched every page again. Nothing. Then, tucked inside one of Diane's old witness statements, I found a handwritten note in the margin. The ink had faded with age, making it difficult to read. I leaned closer under the lamp and slowly deciphered the words. "If anything happens to me, ask Michael. He saw everything." My heart skipped a beat. Michael. I had not heard that name in over 20 years. Michael Harper had once been a close family friend. Then, without warning, he moved across the country. According to everyone I knew, he had completely disappeared from our lives. Yet Diane clearly believed he possessed information important enough to preserve. I immediately searched through old address books and family records, hoping to find some trace of him. After nearly an hour, I discovered a faded Christmas card from years ago. There was a return address on the back. I stared at it for several seconds. The card had been mailed from Colorado. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. As I answered, a familiar voice spoke only 6 words before the line went silent. "Do not trust everything Lisa says." The call lasted less than 3 seconds, yet it changed everything. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, listening to the silence in my dining room. The voice had sounded familiar, but I could not place it. It was neither Karen nor Emily. It was not Lisa either. Whoever called wanted to plant a seed of doubt, and unfortunately, it worked. For the first time since this strange chain of events began, I found myself questioning everything. What if Lisa was wrong? What if the documents only showed part of the story? What if every person involved had their own version of the truth? I sat down and closed my eyes. Robert always used to say that when everyone is talking at once, the smartest thing to do is listen to the evidence instead of the noise. The evidence was still sitting on my table. Documents, letters, witness statements. None of those things could make phone calls. None of them could manipulate emotions. Facts were facts. Yet something still felt incomplete. My attention returned to Michael Harper. His name kept resurfacing. Diane trusted him. The note specifically said he had seen everything. If anyone could explain the missing 6 months, it was probably him. The next morning, I decided to track him down. Using the old Colorado address from the Christmas card, I began searching public records and online directories. Most of the information was outdated, but after several hours, I finally found a phone number connected to a Michael Harper living in a small town outside Denver. My hands trembled as I dialed. The phone rang 4 times before a man answered. Hello. The voice sounded older, but something about it felt familiar. Michael? I asked cautiously. Yes. This is Margaret Collins. Silence. Long silence. Then a slow exhale. Margaret, he said quietly. I wondered if this day would ever come. The response immediately told me two things. First, he remembered me. Second, he knew exactly why I was calling. You know about the situation? I asked. More than I wish I did. My heart pounded. Then tell me what happened. Another pause followed. Not over the phone, he replied. The exact same words Lisa had used. Michael, people have spent years believing things about me that are not true. I know, he said. That is why we need to talk carefully. I leaned forward in my chair. Did Karen tell Emily lies? No, he answered immediately. At least not intentionally. That response surprised me. Then what happened? Michael sighed. Karen genuinely believes her version of events. That is what makes this so tragic. I felt frustration building. Everyone seemed to know pieces of the story, yet nobody would simply explain it. Michael, please. Margaret, he said gently, have you ever considered that Karen may not be the person who started all of this? The question caught me completely off guard. Until that moment, every clue pointed toward Karen's altered memories. I had never considered another possibility. If not Karen, then who? I asked. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, Michael spoke. There was someone else influencing her back then. A chill ran through me. Who? Someone very close to your family. I searched my memory. Friends, relatives, neighbors, church members. Dozens of faces flashed through my mind. You're going to have to be more specific, I said. I will, Michael replied. But not until you see something first. See what? I kept a box, he said quietly. For 22 years, I kept a box containing letters, journal entries, and records from that time. I always hoped nobody would ever need them. My pulse quickened. Another box. Another hidden collection of evidence. Do you still have it? I asked. Every single page. Then Michael said something that made my stomach drop. And one of those letters was written by Emily's father just 3 weeks before he died.